This is the first of 2 nuggets on project communications management. This nugget will focus on the first 2 aspects of project communications management, or the planning for communications. The next nugget will focus on the actual distribution or communications process. Project communications management in this new version of the PMBOK guide, in this new version of the PMP exam, has changed somewhat from the earlier release. At first blush of examining project communications management and comparing the process areas to the previous release, it looks like there's been a lot of change. It's actually not that significant. There is one new process area identified, which is the identification of stakeholders. There has been restructuring down here, where report performance was an earlier process activity, and then manage stakeholders was the last. We have subtly renamed this one to be managing stakeholders' expectations, which is a much better representation of what this process area is all about. So again, some changes, not as significant as may first appear, but some changes in this new version of the PMBOK guide for this release of the PMP exam itself. This nugget is going to focus on identifying of the stakeholders, determining who cares, literally determining who cares about our project, and then planning the communications processes appropriate to those who cares, to those stakeholders, to make sure that we're communicating with each and every stakeholder effectively. The first step in communications management is to identify the stakeholders. As I mentioned a moment ago, this is a new process area in this release of the PMBOK guide. It's not a new activity per se. Identifying the stakeholders was always part of communications management. It's just in this release of the PMBOK guide, in this version of the PMP, it's been called out to give it additional attention, and this is additional attention that is well-founded. Identifying stakeholders is going to consist of doing a stakeholder analysis, understanding who the stakeholders are, making sure we identify all, and I will stress the all, identify all of the stakeholders for your project. Some of the stakeholders are going to be very easy to identify: the team, senior management, customer management. But there's going to be other stakeholders who may be in other business units who are impacted by the project. There may be stakeholders outside of your organization in terms of your customers or your suppliers who are going to have an interest in the project. Once you've identified all of the stakeholders, you need to log them and put them into a stakeholder registry, so that once we have done the stakeholder identification, we're not going to lose track of the stakeholders, and we're not going to forget to communicate to them. And then finally, we're going to develop a management strategy. How are we going to, and the word is intentional, how are we going to manage the stakeholders? And specifically, how are we going to manage the communications to the stakeholders? A key concept introduced in this release of the PMBOK guide for stakeholder management is to develop a grid for our stakeholders. And I'm going to do this very quickly and very smallly due to the lack of real estate. And you put the interest of the stakeholders from low to high. On this axis, you put the power or influence of the stakeholders on this axis from low to high. And I'm just going to divide this into 4 quadrants. And in this lower quadrant, we're going to just say monitor. We're going to keep the stakeholders in this quadrant of interest. We're going to inform these stakeholders. We're going to satisfy these stakeholders, and we're going to manage these stakeholders. And then from your stakeholder registry, you say, okay, what are the characteristics of stakeholder A? And you're going to say, well, their interest is low and their power is low, so I'm going to put them down here. from the registry, you're going to take stakeholder B and says, well, their interest is very high, and in fact their power is very high. So I'm going to put B in here, and then again C from our registry. Their interest is high, but their power is low, so we're going to put C in here. And we're going to develop some formal strategy for identifying and developing a strategy for dealing with each and every one of these stakeholders. And that strategy is going to lead directly into our next communications process, which is developing the plan. The next step in the communications process is planning. Or in other words, determine the information requirements. You need to understand who cares about your project. You need to understand what information they want to see about your project. You need to understand what time frames they want to see the project information in. And you need to understand what format they wish the project information to be distributed them by. The first step of that is determining who. Who cares about your project? Who needs to see project status information? Who needs to deal with project risks? Who need to deal with project challenges? Obviously, a key group who are very involved with the project and who are very interested in knowing how the project is doing is your project team. And you need to ensure that you have effective communications processes in place to ensure full flow of information both from you downwards into the team so they understand how the overall project is doing, as well as full flow of information upwards from the team members so that you, the project manager, get detailed status information, detailed information about how they are doing as part of their project delivery activities. Another key person who is very interested in knowing information about the project is the sponsor or the project acceptor, the person in the business who you are delivering the project for. They're going to want to know very detailed information, probably at or about the same level as the team is interested in seeing. Another group of people who are going to be very interested in your project are management. Both direct line managers of yourself and the sponsors, as well as more senior managers in the organization, are going to want to know how the project is doing, if the project is having issues and project is having challenges. So once you've been successful in identifying who cares about your project, who wants to see project status information, you then need to focus on what information these various stakeholders want to see. You're going to need to know what level of detail. Some of the groups are going to want very detailed information. The team and the sponsor, for example, are going to want to know detailed, day-by-day, week-by-week information about the project, where management, in particular senior management, are going to want to know summary information. So you're going to have to ensure you have the processes in place to distribute detailed information to those project stakeholders who want detailed information, and you have the appropriate processes in place to summarize the information and provide summary information to those who only want summary information, such as senior management. What type of information are these groups going to want to see, either in detail or summary? Well, obviously they're going to want to know project status details. Is the project on target? Are the tasks that we're supposed to be working on this week being completed? Is the project on budget? What risks are occurring on the project? What do we need to ensure the project is moving forward? Along that area, we need to know about project issues. Where is the project having challenges? Where is the project encountering delivery difficulty? What information can you distribute to your project stakeholders to help them better help you ensure the project is going to be successful? Once you've identified the who and the what, the next step is to understand how. How are you going to distribute the information? Is it going to be a formal distribution? Formal as in a written documentation? Or is it going to be informal? Informal may be emails, informal may be telephone conversations, informal may be ad hoc meetings where you simply pop into the sponsor's office to say, hey, by the way, I've been tracking this risk and it's no longer a project challenge. So you need to understand how you're going to distribute the information. Is it formal or is it informal? You need to understand, are you going to be distribute the information by phone, by email, or by formal written reports? You need to know all of this information in advance to effectively plan your communication strategy for the project. Who, what, and how. And once you have a full understanding of the who, the what, and the how, you can put together your communications management plan that will define the processes that will be used by you, the project manager, the processes that will be used by the team to distribute the appropriate information, the what, using the appropriate vehicles, the how, either formally or informally, to ensure that the information requirements of all project stakeholders are being satisfied. Communications does not happen by accident. You must formally plan the processes for communications and then follow those processes to ensure that all of the project stakeholders are aware of the project status, are aware of the project issues, and are therefore able to take the appropriate actions to move your project forward. Before we can begin our communications planning process, we need to thoroughly understand the communications process itself. We need to understand what it takes to get a message from a sender to a receiver in a state that's fully understood, that is unambiguous, that it's clear that what the sender wanted to send is in fact what the receiver has received and understood. The first step in that process is the encoding of the message. With encoding, the sender translates their thought processes, translates the raw information, and puts it into a format that is suitable for transmission to the receiver. I have a friend of many years ago who was a multilinguist, spoke 5 different languages. And when I talked to him about his thought process and his communications process, he actually explained that he thought in one language, his native language that he learnt as a child growing up, and that he often translated from his native language to a common language, often English, as part of his cognitive process for understanding and reasoning, and then would actually translate again from English to the appropriate language for whoever he was communicating with. Now, typically, we don't have that degree of complexity with our encoding process, but we still need to go through the steps to ensure that our intentions are in fact the same as what we deliver. And what we deliver is in fact the next step in the process, is the actual message, the information that we want to distribute, the information that we want to send to the sender or to the receiver. So the next step is ensuring that we get the right information, that we get the right data, that we gather all of the data, and we have all of the information that we require and assemble it into an appropriate message for transmission to the receiver. Then we send the message itself, and that involves sending the message through the medium. The medium is the form that we chose to send the message in. The medium could be voice, the medium could be email, the medium could be formal written reports, but we need to ensure that we're selecting the appropriate medium that's going to deliver the message that we want to do in a format that's understandable by the receiver. As part of the process, we need to understand what's happening as part of the transmission process. What noise exists to potentially damage our message, to possibly corrupt our message, to possibly change our message from what we intended to send to what is actually received and understood by the receiver. Now, noise can be as simple as noise in the physical environment. When you're communicating verbally, noise can affect the ability of the receiver to hear and understand the message. But noise can be other issues. Noise can be cultural. Recently, I was lecturing to a number of MBA students, and I realized that there were a number of international students in the audience, and that they were potentially having problems understanding some of the message I was delivering because the noise being I was using some colloquialisms, I was using even so much as slang that was appropriate in a North American culture that may not be fully understood by some of the international students. So I had to take very specific conscious effort to eliminate slang, to eliminate colloquialisms from my conversation, to ensure that the international students were receiving the messages that I wanted to receive, and they were not missing the intent or certainly the nuances of the message that I was delivering. Noise can also be things like typos, spelling mistakes, grammar mistakes, overall bad formatting and bad presentation of documents or of emails. If the information presented is not in a format that is easily understandable, the receiver is going to have some problems interpreting and understanding the message that was intended to be delivered. And then finally, once the message makes it to the receiver has to decode the message. Decoding could be, again, as complex as my multilingual friend who has to receive the message in one language, translate it to another language for the cognitive thought process, and finally translate it to another language for storage in the brain for later retrieval and processing. Or the decoding may be as simple as reading the message and understanding the message, or taking the message and putting it into context. But you, as part of developing your communications management plan, need to ensure you understand the 5 steps. What's involved with the coding process, how you ensure the right message is getting, the right information is getting into the message, how to pick the appropriate medium to transfer the message, how to make sure that noise is not going to impact your ability to deliver the message, and then finally what process the receiver is going to go through to interpret the message, to understand the message, and store it away for later processing based on their own information requirements. So that is the 5-step communications process. There are a few more issues that we need to be aware of when working on the communications process. Let's clear this away and start with a blank screen and look at some of those other issues. So some of the other issues that you need to be aware of as part of putting together your communications management plan, we touched on this earlier, is the medium itself. What is the appropriate medium that you need to use to distribute the information, to communicate with the receiver? The choice of medium is going to be dictated by the type of information you want to deliver. If you have detailed information, for example, a budget, you're not going to want to distribute it by voice or even by email. You're going to want to use a formal report. You may even want to put it into a spreadsheet and send the spreadsheet electronically. Other information would be better presented as a presentation with summary slides and the appropriate information, the appropriate graphics to present the information that you want to deliver. Other information, if it's more casual, certainly a voice conversation or a telephone conversation may be appropriate. Email is a terrific communications vehicle, but not appropriate for all types of communications. You need to ensure, as part of your communications thought process, that you're picking the appropriate medium for the specific requirement that you have at that point in time, because the appropriate medium will change. You will be using all of the above. You'll be writing some reports. You'll be creating spreadsheets. You'll be producing and providing presentations. You'll be making phone calls and leaving voicemails. You'll be delivering emails. You need to find the appropriate medium for the information that you want to deliver at the time. Another key factor is the type of communications you want to deliver. Is it formal communication? Or is it informal? Different medium, different styles are going to be appropriate whether you're talking of formal communications. Obviously, formal communications, things like presentations and reports, are very appropriate for formal communication. Informal communication, often voice or email is going to be more appropriate. Again, pick the appropriate style, pick the appropriate type of communication strategy to ensure that the message you want to deliver is being delivered and that it's being delivered in the appropriate format to ensure that the information is received, understood, and reusable by your receiver. Distance can have a huge bearing in communications. If you're trying to communicate with someone on the other side of the world, sending something by mail is going to take days or weeks to get the information to them. If you send it by courier, it's probably 2 or 3 days. If you send it electronically, it's virtually instantaneous. And if you try to phone them and they live on the other side of the world with a 12-hour time zone difference, telephone, although a wonderful instantaneous communications vehicle, is not going to be appropriate for dealing with someone 12 hours time zones away. You need to find the appropriate type of communications that's going to allow you to communicate over the distance. Sending email gives you the benefit of instant communications while still allowing it to be stored and processed the next morning when the person is awake after being asleep based on the 12-hour distance. So distance and time zones, are also issues that you have to be aware of as you're putting together your communications process and putting together your communications management plan. You need to ensure that everything is in place, that you're able to encode, that you're able to send the message, that it eliminates noise in the channels, that it's able to be decoded, and that the information you want to send is in fact the information that is received and understood by the stakeholder, by the project participant at the other end of the communications process. Although, as we have discussed, communications is very important to effective project management, it's also your job as a project manager to try to minimize the number of communications channels in place in your project to ensure that only the required communications takes place and that all communications is effective. If we look at the example we have here in the whiteboard, we have 4 participants in our project that need to communicate with each other. We see we have a number of communications channels. If we look at the communications channels, we see we have 4 around the outside edge and 2 across the diagonal, resulting in a total of 6 separate communications channels, 6 separate communication paths, assuming that each and every one of these project participants needs to talk to each and every one of the other project participants. To try to make this easier to understand, or easier to develop the number of communications paths for large projects, there is a relatively simple formula that we can apply, and that's the number of project participants times the number of project participants minus 1. And you divide that all by 2. So if we look at our example, we have 4 project participants times 4 minus 3, or 4 minus 1, giving us 3, over 2, so that gives us 12 over 2, or 6 communications channels, as we saw from the diagram. Now, if we increase the size of our project a little bit, we add 2 more project participants, that brings our number of participants up to 6, and we go 6 minus 1, so it's 6 times 5 over 2, or 30 over 2, or a total of 15 communications channels. By simply adding half as many more project participants, we have more than doubled the number of communication paths between each of the project participants. It's your job as the project manager to try to minimize those number of communications channels to ensure, again, that only the communications required is taking place and that the communications process is effective as possible. The best tool you have for doing that is your organization chart. Through the development of an effective project organization by the development of teams with team leaders, you can manage the number of communications channels. By having teams in place, each team member will be communicating within their team, but probably with very little communications across teams, and the communications across teams would be done by the team leaders. So instead of having one very large communications process, you would have a number of smaller communications processes within each team and then between the team members. So the goal is to try to keep the number of communications processes down to as small a number as possible without letting it grow to large numbers. And we do that primarily through the development of effective project organization charts with the delineation of roles and responsibilities to minimize the number of communications channels. We see this in action with this hypothetical organization chart. By creating 3 separate sub-teams, we've effectively limited the amount of communications that has to happen, where only the members of sub-teams communicate with each other, and then we have intercommunications across the team leaders, drastically reducing the communications channels. Instead of one very large communications process that must be managed, we actually have 4 very small communications processes that are managed, and this results in much more effective, much more efficient project communications. In order to ensure that the communications process for your project is efficient, as effective as possible, I would like to offer you a few guidelines. The first of these guidelines is ensure you develop templates for your project. The idea with a template is you create it once, and it's used often. By having the appropriate templates in place for your project, people will simply have to go to a common directory, go to the location where the templates are stored, retrieve the template, and fill in the blanks. It's much more effective than starting from a blank piece of paper, a blank document, and trying to understand what is required. By ensuring that the thought process is focused on the material to be delivered as opposed to the structure, it ensures that the right information is being communicated throughout your project. Another key to effective communications is ensuring standards are in place, ensuring that everybody is doing things the same way, ensuring that all status reports have a consistent look and feel, and that all status reports contain the same information. Standards and procedures ensure that we do the right things right. Procedures ensure that everybody is following the same steps. Procedures ensure that everybody is communicating the same information in the same style, in the same manner. The guidelines are there to ensure that you have efficient and effective processes in place. The key to ensuring that communications happens on your project is it has to be easy. Communications is often thought of as a burden. Communications is often thought of as a distraction from the core process of the project of delivering actual project results. You need to ensure that you have the templates, that you have the standards, that you have the procedures in place to ensure that communications is easy, that the team members do not have to struggle to find out what they have to do, they do not have to struggle to find out how to do it, that the information they need is there, and it is as easy as possible for them to communicate, to distribute the information that they need to the entire project stakeholder community. The conclusion of the communications planning process is obviously the development of the communications management plan. The communications management plan is going to be the summary, the consolidation of all of the information that we've discussed thus far in this nugget. Obviously, one of the key components to the communications management plan is going to be the definition of the stakeholders and the stakeholder requirements, the identification of all of the stakeholders, the project team, the sponsor, the senior management, others in the organization who care about your project, is the identification of all of the stakeholders and the identification of their specific information requirements. What type of information do they require? Do they require detailed status information on a weekly basis? Do they require summarized status information on a monthly basis or bi-monthly basis? The communications management plan is going to identify each and every stakeholder and their specific information requirements. It's going to identify the responsibilities. Who is responsible for producing the weekly status report? When is the weekly status report due? It's going to identify the methods with which the communications is going to happen. Which communications will be formal through written documentation, which communications methods will be informal through meetings, through phone conversations, through email conversations, and it's going to identify the frequencies of communications. The Communications Management Plan summarizes all of the information that you as the project manager have put together to ensure that you've effectively identified who cares about the project, what information they require, and how it's going to be distributed. It's going to ensure that you're addressing all of the aspects to the communications channel, the encoding, the message, the medium, ensuring that there is no noise to prevent the communications from happening, and that there is successful decoding at the other end. The Communications Management Plan is a formal document that you, the project manager, must produce, and it's a formal document that must be presented to the sponsor, to senior management in your organization, and approved and signed off. By presenting the Communications Management Plan, getting approval and sign-off in the Communications Management Plan, you're ensuring that the definition of the stakeholder requirements, the information requirements, the responsibilities, the methods, and the frequencies are satisfying the requirements for the sponsor and for senior management. What would a Communications Management Plan look like? Let's have a quick look at a Communications Management Plan. Here's a sample template. Remember, one of the successful factors of good project communications is development of templates. So the template would do things like doing a global change of all project name to your project name. So that is an example of a template in place in our project. If we scroll down in this a little bit and go to the table of contents, we'll see in the table of contents the information that we've discussed already. The introduction, the requirements, who is going to be communicated to, the approach, what information is going to be communicated by paper, what information is going to be communicated by email, what communication is going to be communicated via the internet, i.e. the generation of a project website, and the timing and responsibilities. So here we have a formal Project Communications Management Plan that was produced as part of project planning and is going to be presented to senior management, to the acceptor, for final sign-off to ensure that we're addressing the project requirements and that all the project stakeholders will be receiving the information that they require, getting the information that they want in the appropriate format at the appropriate time. As we said at the beginning, effective communications is the single most important thing that you can do as a project manager to ensure that all project stakeholders are receiving the information they require, and that is done through the development and publication of your Communications Management Plan.
This concludes our first of two nuggets on communications management. This nugget was focused on planning. In this nugget, we examine the new process area from this release, which is identifying the stakeholders, doing our stakeholder analysis, and determining the management strategy for ensuring the effective inclusion of each and every one of those stakeholders into our project, and we do that through our communications process. Once we have the stakeholders fully identified, we went through and we developed our communications plan, taking into account all of the characteristics of communications, taking into account some of the considerations required for effective management and coordination of communications throughout the project. In our next nugget, we'll look at communications in action.
This concludes our nugget on communications planning. I hope that this video has been informative for you, and I thank you very much for viewing.